Imagine opening your eyes after a devastating plane crash, only to discover you are trapped more than 12,000 feet above sea level. Every direction is covered by ice. The temperature is far below freezing. Food is almost gone. And soon, you'll hear the words that destroy your last hope. The search has been called off. This isn't fiction. This is the incredible true story of Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571. On October 13, 1972, Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571 took off from Montevideo, Uruguay, carrying 45 people on what was supposed to be a short journey to Santiago, Chile. Most of the passengers were members of the Old Christians Club rugby team, accompanied by friends and family. Spirits were high, and no one on board could have imagined that this ordinary flight would soon become one of the greatest survival stories in history. Because of poor weather over the Andes Mountains, the aircraft landed in Mendoza, Argentina, and remained there overnight. The next afternoon, the crew decided to continue the journey, believing conditions had improved. But the Andes are among the most dangerous mountain ranges in the world. Thick clouds, powerful air currents, and limited visibility made navigation extremely difficult. As the plane flew through the mountains, the pilots mistakenly believed they had already cleared the highest peaks and requested permission to descend. Moments later, disaster struck. The aircraft slammed into a mountain ridge at high speed. One wing ripped away, then the other. The tail broke off, and the remaining fuselage skidded across the snow before finally coming to a violent stop. 12 people were killed instantly. Many of the survivors suffered broken bones, head injuries, and severe wounds. Stranded in the freezing wilderness with almost no food, no radio, and no clear idea where they were, they waited for rescuers, certain that help would arrive within hours. But the Andes had other plans, and their fight for survival was only beginning. The crash had lasted only a few seconds, but surviving it was becoming a battle that would last for weeks. When the sun rose over the Andes, the survivors finally saw where they had landed. There were no forests, no roads, no signs of civilization, just endless walls of snow and jagged mountain peaks stretching to the horizon. It felt less like Earth, and more like another planet. Some passengers couldn't even stand. Others were fighting unbearable pain from broken legs, fractured ribs, and deep cuts. Yet no one had the luxury of giving up. Every person who could move was suddenly responsible for keeping someone else alive. The wreckage became their only shelter. During the day, sunlight reflected off the snow with blinding intensity. But as evening approached, the temperature collapsed below freezing. Inside the broken fuselage, they packed themselves shoulder to shoulder, using torn luggage, seat cushions, and scraps of clothing to block the icy wind. Sleep came in minutes, never hours. Then another problem began to haunt them: hunger. After searching every suitcase, they discovered only a few snacks, chocolates, and tiny supplies left from the flight. They divided everything into portions so small that each meal disappeared in a single bite. Every day the food became scarcer, while their bodies became weaker. Still, they refused to lose hope. Several times a day, they heard aircraft engines echoing through the mountains. Hearts raced. People climbed onto the snow, waving clothes and shouting until their voices disappeared into the wind. But every plane passed overhead, without slowing down. Then one afternoon, they managed to power a small radio from the wreckage. Everyone crowded around, expecting to hear rescue instructions. Instead, a calm voice delivered a sentence that changed everything. The official search has ended. Silence filled the fuselage. In that moment, they understood a terrifying reality. The radio's message changed everything. Until that day, the survivors had been waiting. Now, they were planning. If no rescue team was coming, every decision they made from this point forward could mean the difference between life and death. But the mountains had one more nightmare waiting for them. Several days later, as everyone slept inside the wreckage, a deafening roar exploded across the valley. An avalanche. Within seconds, a massive wall of snow crashed into the fuselage, burying it beneath tons of ice. The survivors were thrown into complete darkness. Some couldn't move. Others struggled to breathe as snow packed tightly around their bodies. For nearly 3 days, those still alive fought to dig themselves out using nothing but their hands and pieces of broken metal. By the time they escaped, several more friends had lost their lives. The disaster left them with almost no food, and even less hope. One impossible question now stood in front of them. How far would a human go, just to stay alive? After days of painful discussion, tears, and silence, the group reached a decision that none of them had ever imagined making. They would use the bodies of those who had died in the crash as their only source of food. It was not a choice made out of desperation alone. It was a choice made because there was no other way to survive. Even after making that heartbreaking decision, they knew one thing: they couldn't remain in the mountains forever. If rescue wasn't coming, someone would have to cross the Andes on foot. It sounded impossible. But in the next part, a handful of exhausted survivors would attempt one of the most incredible journeys in human history, a journey that would decide whether anyone ever returned home alive. By December 1972, more than 2 months had passed since the crash. Most people had already accepted that Flight 571 had disappeared forever. But inside the frozen Andes, 3 survivors refused to surrender. Nando Pardo, Roberto Canessa, and Antonio Vizintin packed the little they had and began climbing toward the highest peaks. Every step drained their remaining strength. The air was thin, the snow reached their knees, and freezing winds punished them day and night. After reaching the summit, they expected to see green valleys on the other side. Instead, they saw nothing but more mountains. For a moment, it felt as though the Andes would never end. To save food, Antonio Vizintin turned back, leaving Nando Pardo and Roberto Canessa to continue alone. For nearly 10 days, they crossed frozen ridges, climbed cliffs, and descended dangerous slopes, surviving on almost nothing. Then, something unbelievable happened. For the first time in over 70 days, they saw signs of life. A river. Grass. And finally, a Chilean horseman named Sergio Catalan. Because the rushing river was too loud to shout across, Pardo wrote a desperate message on a piece of paper, tied it to a rock, and threw it across the water. The note reached Catalan. He immediately rode for help. Within hours, rescue teams were on their way. On December the 22nd and 23rd, 1972, helicopters returned to the crash site and rescued the remaining 16 survivors. After 72 days trapped in one of the harshest environments on Earth, they were finally going home. The story of Flight 571 became one of the greatest survival stories ever recorded, not because the survivors were the strongest, but because they refused to give up when the rest of the world believed they were already dead.